Hey YouTube, this is City Prepping. If you're new to this channel, my name is Chris, and on this channel we discuss emergency preparedness, aka prepping. Now I've been offline for about a week or so trying to take a break. I just launched my course a couple of weeks ago, and I've tried to take a little time to recover. But I thought it was important tonight to jump back in because we're living in a very historical moment. What happens over the next week or two could shape our world for the coming decade. Really, what could happen over the next 12 to 24 hours for that matter. And a lot of things can go wrong very quickly. I always try to hope for the best, but as a prepper, I try to prepare for the worst, and I try to be as realistic as I can. If things spread outside of Ukraine and Putin continues on this path, there's really no telling what will come next. So we have to evaluate the situation in Ukraine, Russia, China, and World War III. And I hate to use that phrase flippantly, World War III, because I know it's often used in clickbait at this time, but I think for the first time in quite some time, it's a phrase that is appropriate. So what we'll do in this video is we'll talk about what's going on. What I'll do is I'll take you through a series of videos, or rather articles that I found that I curated before I put this video together. I think are very insightful to give you a perspective of what's happening now. Tonight is February 25th. It's a Friday night. I'm sorry, I had to look at the clock there, or the calendar. And we'll talk about what can come next, and we'll finish up with what you should be doing now, especially if you're new to this preparedness community. I'm getting asked a lot of people reaching out in email, messaging me on different social media platforms and asking what can they do now, and we'll talk about that at the end of the video. I would encourage you to stick with me. We're going to go through a lot of material. I'm going to cover this as quickly as I can, and what we'll do is we'll lead off with the obvious question of what's happening, what's going on at this moment. Right now, Russia is facing more resistance than it really expected in Ukraine. And there's some different articles that we'll look over, and I'm going to go ahead and pull these up that I think are very insightful. And all these articles I'm going to post in the description section below if you want to check these out. So I'll go through these. Now, this first article is Russia is facing more resistance than it expected. I'm pretty encouraged by that. Ukraine, everything that I've been reading about this community, or rather this nation, excuse me, there's some pretty amazing people, very patriotic, and they are standing and fighting. And I think things are moving at a lot slower pace than Russia had anticipated from what I'm studying and what I'm seeing. The next article that I'll get into is what we have to really expect for tonight. And tonight, Zelensky is warning that Russia will probably storm Kiev. This is something, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that we need to watch for the next 12 hours, what's going to play out. Because if Kiev falls and Zelensky is removed, this is probably going to be a setup for Russia to begin to install the puppet regime. Let's look at the next article here and take a look at this. Oops, sorry. Still getting used to this equipment. Let's hop over here. This next one, Zelensky to US or EU leaders, this might be the last time you see me alive. And it's fascinating that he has chosen to stay, and he has not left like so many other leaders in these situations, even though he's been warned that if it falls, you will probably disappear. And he realizes that. And I think this guy is pretty amazing, again, that he's standing in unity with his people and that he's choosing not to walk away from this situation. Again, I think the Ukraine soldiers are some studs, everything that I'm seeing coming out of this country. Now, this next article, this one is Vladimir Putin appears to threaten nuclear attack. And this is obviously with what's happening with Russia. It doesn't surprise me that Vladimir Putin would say this. Clearly, he doesn't want NATO and other allies to begin to push in and try to provide any resistance or stand with the Ukrainian people. And it's one thing for someone that's in charge of one nuclear head, like we see in North Korea, and they give threats, but it's a whole different ballgame when you have someone that's clearly unhinged with 6,000 nuclear warheads at their disposal. And this to me is very, very concerning. Let's look at the next article here. Let me hop over to this. This next one is, let's see, Anonymous. They are leaking database of the Russian Ministry of Defense. If you don't know what Anonymous is, it's a group of hackers worldwide that tend to turn their energy toward events like this to be a part of what's happening, and it's very encouraging to see that they're releasing information. I'll post a link to this article as well. The next one is the United States is beginning to impose sanctions on Putin following Ukraine invasion. I know a lot of people are pretty upset with this. That, you know, the question is this all that the United States is going to do? I'm not going to try to jump into the politics of this right now. There's a lot that's playing. I would like to believe in a perfect world that the Ukrainian people will be able to stand up and fight and hold their ground, and that this will hopefully not turn into a situation where Russia will steamroll Ukraine. But at the moment, if the United States wants to get involved, that would open up the potential for, as we said at the beginning of the video, World War III, and clearly no one wants that situation. Now, the next article that we'll hop over to really quick is, let me just pop this over here, is, let's see, a Russian invasion, the Pentagon, not clear if Putin has designs beyond the Ukraine. And out of everything that I've gone over, this one is the one that concerns me the most. That if Ukraine, every sign, at least what I can see, and again, I don't have the insight that others do, but if Putin were to decide to push past Ukraine into the Baltic states, which are currently NATO aligned, but if he were to continue to push forward, this is where we really begin to get into a potential World War III situation. And that is, for me, the biggest concern that I have watching over the next week. If Putin, in his current state of mind, which doesn't seem to be a very tactically minded individual, he seems to be making moves that a lot of people just did not assume would happen. But if he continues to push on, we have severe problems. Let's hop over to the next one here. This one is, let's see, NATO response force is activated for the first time. We're seeing some very historical events playing out right now. And it begs a question, you know, are these steps that are being taken, are these steps leading to a potentially larger war? And as I'm stating over and over, these are the events that are concerning me. I will say this, it really seems that Putin may have miscalculated how NATO would respond. And while this does concern me on one hand, it encourages me on the other hand that NATO is uniting instead of being divided. I think Putin really had the anticipation that at the moment, or rather the thought that the world is divided, NATO especially, and that they would not stand up. And it's fascinating to see that it appears to be quite the opposite, the reaction, and I think he's overplayed his hand. NATO, this next article, the NATO response, is forcing Finland and Sweden to begin to discuss joining NATO. And as we're seeing here, Russia says Finland or Sweden could face consequences if countries move to join NATO. Again, he's beginning to threaten these other nations that are around these Baltic states or further out that are currently, I didn't even realize that Finland and Sweden are not part of NATO. I assumed that they were. Again, just as I'm studying and learning more and more, it's fascinating to see the dynamics in this area. And again, with Russia threatening, this could be a pretty big game changer, which leads me to the next article that is pretty telling of what's happening. And this one is, again, Finland or Sweden joining NATO could spark a Russian response. And again, if they decide to make this step forward, it's not clear what Russia will do. Clearly, the article that we just referenced, Russia is making threats that if they do, the consequences would be swift. But it's fascinating. This article that I'm showing here, or rather this link, is a petition in, I believe, Finland. It is Finland, that they have to essentially put together, people have to vote to say, we want this to be discussed, joining NATO. And it's funny that because of this invasion, Finland is closer than ever to joining NATO before this event ever occurred, because as we're looking here, there's currently, this is a citizens initiative about holding a national vote to join NATO. And at the moment, it's a little over 37,000 votes, and the required minimum is 50,000 signatures for the parliament to debate and vote on the issue. And what's interesting is it took just 4 days to get them to this point of 37,000 votes. Now, I'll give you a reference point. Previously, these types of initiatives to join NATO in this country got only about 2,000 signatures or less. So, as we're seeing, there's a big shift within this country and a big concern to make this, take this step. Now, the next article that we'll look at is in regards to China. China is, it's fascinating watching how they're handling this situation. They seem to be making, kind of talking out both sides of their mouth. They're adjusting, readjusting, speaking positively and negatively of the Russian situation. As many of you can probably imagine, we'll probably see a move on China's part into Taiwan if this chaos in this area continues. Now, this next article is, let me pull this one up. China says it respects Ukraine's sovereignty and Russia's security concern, and then they're actually taking steps to begin, apparently, to restrict financing to Russia. And I think And I think really what it comes down to is China's done the math, and losing the U.S. and other EU countries in a financial relationship would be a lot more detrimental than losing Russia. And so I think they've done the math, and for them, throwing Russia under the bus may make more sense than losing these financial relationships that they have. Let's hop over to the next article and finish up with this one. Sorry, let me hop over here. This one is China's support for Russia turns Ukraine into battleground for New World Order. And if you read this article, it's fascinating because what we're seeing here in this situation, and I'll cut back here, is in this moment, we're seeing so many events play out. There's a tectonic shift happening. And what we're seeing and what will play out over the next week or two will ultimately, I think, determine potentially the next decade, depending on how this escalates. But it's clearly changing the dynamic in this part of the world. And I think China is simply trying to play both sides of the issue. As I stated a moment ago, I don't doubt that they're probably extremely frustrated with Russia and Putin at this moment because Russia, or Putin rather, I think has taken China's playbook and they've moved on Ukraine. And I'm sure China had something very similar planned for Taiwan. And of course, the question will come up, what happens with Taiwan next? Will China respect its sovereignty? I personally doubt that. I would not be surprised if this situation continues that China will try to make moves. I'm not saying they will, but it would not surprise me. And there was one more article, but I'll just skip to the main point here. This second point is, what can we really expect next? As we just discussed, running through these various articles, the next few days, potentially the next 12 hours, will really tell us a lot. If Zelensky and his cabinet are ousted tonight or in the next week, Russia will simply put in a puppet regime. And what is to be seen is, will the people continue fighting? Will this turn into a drawn-out conflict like the Russians endured in Afghanistan? I think the most likely scenario in the short term is that Russia will occupy Ukraine. The world will continue to impose sanctions on Russia, and we'll all feel pain at the pump and at the food, or rather our food at the grocery store. And the worst case scenario is Putin, and I hesitate to say Russia because I believe this is purely driven by Putin. I think really the worst case scenario here is Putin pushing past Ukraine. While I think it is a possibility, albeit it is a low probability, there's really no telling with someone like this. As I stated a moment ago, Putin is making decisions and taking actions that don't really seem to be sane or calculated. As a potential blowback seems to be far more consequential than this short-term gain. And of course, the question comes up, is nuclear war a possibility? Again, I see this personally as a very low probability, but with so many things happening, it's hard to say. What concerned me is that historically, events like this cause massive changes in a short period of time. I don't really like to take any possibility off the table. Realistically, though, I don't think this is in Putin's best interest to start a nuclear exchange over taking this territory. But I have to put the caveat, I just don't know at this point, and I'm very concerned that this could go either way. So the third point is, what should you be doing now? I'm getting a lot of people that are messaging me, realizing that potentially they're on a short time frame to prepare, and do what you can in the time that you have to prepare. We'll likely see cyber attacks on our banking or our infrastructure in the coming weeks. And if you're not sure where to start and you're new to this, I'll post a link in the description section below to some other videos that I've done, along with my starter guide that you can download for free. And this is some really useful information to get you started on the basics and the foundation. Let me encourage you with this. Stay calm. It would be easy if you live outside the Ukraine to be obviously concerned. If you're in the Ukraine, clearly you've got a whole different set of problems. And my heart goes out and my thoughts and prayers go out to Ukraine. But for those of us that are outside of Ukraine, in a perfect situation, this will not spill out into surrounding or other nations. But it's important that in this time that we have, that you enjoy what you have, you enjoy your family, and you try to prepare. Yesterday, I found myself glued to the internet trying to study things as quickly as possible as things just kept changing so quickly. But I decided, you know what, my wife and I, we decided to head up to the mountains, go out, enjoy some snow. And it was probably one of the best days I've had in quite some time, spending time with my family. I love them. I hold them as close as I can. I realize each day is a gift that we have. And I would encourage you to do the same. It's easy mentally to get caught up in this and to allow your mind to begin to turn and wonder what could happen. Clearly, anything could happen. My thoughts at the moment are I think we'll live through some challenging times ahead, but I don't see a major conflict. Having said that, I realize that again, these next several days and next few hours will be very incremental. So my encouragement is always stay safe out there.